The world now owes over $300 trillion, more money than exists in the global economy itself. Every country is in debt, every bank is a lender, and somehow everyone is both broke and rich at the same time. If every nation owes money, one question breaks the system: who is everyone actually paying? The answer reveals that modern civilization is no longer built on stability, but on an endless cycle of borrowing that quietly controls the global economy. A number too big to feel real. The United States now carries more than $36 trillion in government debt, a figure so large it barely registers emotionally. It is bigger than the economies of China, Japan, and Germany combined, yet it is not imaginary. Every dollar represents money owed to someone. Many people assume China is America's main creditor, and while China does hold hundreds of billions in US bonds, it is itself buried under more than $18 trillion in debt. Chinese banks owe money to Chinese institutions while simultaneously owning American debt. American banks own European debt. European funds hold Asian bonds. The deeper you look, the more tangled it becomes. The world now carries over $300 trillion in total debt, more than 3 times global annual economic output. If everyone owes money, the obvious question is simple but disturbing. Who is actually getting paid? Debt is older than money itself. Debt feels like a modern invention filled with spreadsheets and central banks, but it is one of humanity's oldest social tools. Long before coins existed, people borrowed from one another. A farmer might lend grain in spring and receive it back after harvest. A fisherman might borrow tools and repay in fish. There were no contracts, only trust. At its core, debt is nothing more than borrowing from the future to solve a problem in the present. As societies grew, the scale of borrowing expanded. Kings needed armies and empires needed ships, but no single individual could finance wars alone. This problem led governments to invent public bonds in the 17th century, allowing ordinary citizens to lend to the state in exchange for interest. This transformed debt from a private agreement into a foundation of national finance. How the gold standard's collapse changed everything. For much of the 20th century, global money was tied to gold through the US dollar. Under this system, the amount of money governments could create was limited by physical gold reserves. The problem was that economies grew far faster than gold supplies. As the US spent heavily on wars and social programs, dollars flooded the global system, far exceeding available gold. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. Money became fiat currency, backed not by metal but by government authority. This removed the natural brake on money creation and borrowing. From that moment forward, governments could spend first and borrow later on an unprecedented scale. Why global debt exploded after the 1980s. Once the gold constraint disappeared, debt stopped being an emergency tool and became a normal economic instrument. Governments learned that borrowing could accelerate growth by funding infrastructure, education, and technology. Over time, debt was no longer a last resort. It became routine. Today, global debt exceeds $300 trillion, more than 3 times the value of everything the world produces annually. This is not a temporary imbalance, it is the operating system of modern civilization. Debt is how highways are built, how recessions are softened, and how economies expand. The shocking truth about US debt. Most people imagine foreign governments holding America hostage. In reality, nearly 70% of US government debt is owned domestically. The US is largely borrowing from itself. When people deposit money in banks, that money is invested. A major destination is government bonds. Pension funds, insurance companies, and investment firms do the same. Ordinary savings quietly become government financing. This is why national debt is not a single villain but a vast internal recycling system. Why bonds sit at the center of the system. Government bonds are considered among the safest financial assets on Earth. They offer predictable returns with minimal default risk. This stability makes them ideal for institutions managing retirement savings and insurance payouts. Large financial institutions rely on bonds to preserve capital while earning steady income. This creates a hidden pipeline where private savings are transformed into public spending, keeping governments liquid and financial markets stable. The circular flow that keeps the world running. Modern debt does not move in straight lines. It moves in circles. Savings become government loans. Governments spend the money. That spending becomes income for businesses and workers. That income becomes new savings. Those savings buy more bonds. The cycle repeats endlessly. The same process happens internationally. Japanese savings finance European bonds. European funds buy American debt. American institutions invest in Asian markets. Global debt is not a pile of unpaid bills waiting to explode. It is a web of continuous motion. Why governments never truly pay off debt. When government bonds mature, they are rarely eliminated. They are refinanced. New debt replaces old debt. This may sound reckless, but it is now standard practice. As long as investors trust a government, refinancing continues smoothly. For wealthy nations, debt becomes permanent infrastructure rather than a temporary burden. Why borrowing cannot simply stop. Debt is no longer optional. In the United States, roughly 1/4 of government spending is funded by borrowing. In China, nearly 1/5 is. If borrowing stopped suddenly, governments would slash spending overnight. Businesses would lose contracts, workers would lose jobs, and consumption would collapse. This is exactly what happened in Greece after 2008 when borrowing froze. Debt withdrawal acts like oxygen loss in an economy. Debt as emergency life support. During crises, borrowing becomes essential. In 2020, governments shut down economies to fight COVID. Tax revenues collapsed while spending surged. The US borrowed nearly $4 trillion in 1 year. Without debt, governments could not stabilize society during emergencies. Modern states are structurally dependent on borrowing to survive shocks. Why developing nations face greater danger. Wealthy countries borrow cheaply. Developing nations do not. Many borrow in foreign currencies. If their currency weakens, repayment becomes far more expensive. Higher interest rates compound the burden. This is how debt spirals form, as seen recently in several emerging economies. The same system that stabilizes rich nations can destabilize fragile ones. The hidden risk beneath the system. Debt functions only while investors believe repayment is safe. If confidence breaks, borrowing costs surge. Governments may respond by printing money, which erodes currency value and fuels inflation. History shows how dangerous this can become. While most countries avoid extremes, the mechanism exists everywhere within the system. Why investors are quietly turning to gold. When financial systems feel fragile, investors seek assets that are not based on promises. Gold cannot default. It is not tied to government balance sheets. This is why gold and silver have surged recently while currencies weaken. Investors are not panicking. They are hedging against systemic risk. The uncomfortable reality. Global debt is not an accident. It is the foundation of modern economics. It fuels growth, stabilizes crises, and funds development. At the same time, it increases fragility and long-term risk. The world economy is no longer built on financial stability, it is built on motion. Borrowing, spending, refinancing, repeating. Debt is not the shadow behind the economy, it is the engine inside it. The question is not whether the system is dangerous, but how long it can keep running without overheating. So global debt isn't just a financial problem, it's the hidden system holding the modern world together, quietly shaping economies, politics, and everyday life. Once you understand how deeply this cycle runs, you start to see that the future of money is far more fragile than it looks on the surface. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more stories that explain how the world really works, make sure to like and subscribe.